All right, there we go. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome and thanks for joining us for another Suds in Science. We're excited to have you here. This is the last one for 2020. And then thankfully we can say goodbye to 2020. That'll be a relief, at least for me. As you might know, if you've been here before, and I recognize the names, but I will still give a little bit of an overview for the benefit of the recording, because we're going to put the recording online. So Suds in Science is a monthly program of the Fleet Science Center. We normally take this to bars and restaurants around town. Obviously, that can't happen, but we're still very happy that we can bring it to you in the virtual worlds. Suds in Science is not your typical lecture. There is no PowerPoint. We'll have a little bit of a slide here today just to help explain something, but normally this is more of a conversation with the scientists. So if you or your friends are interested in getting up close and personal with a scientist, this is the program for you, because we spend more time on a conversation with each other than on PowerPoint presentation, which I think is quite special. So for that reason, we're going to record the beginning part of it as Dr. Chao leads us through his research and work. But once he is done with his overview of his work, then I will stop the recording. And then we get to the Q&A or the discussion and conversation for us and the audience. And we will not be recording that. So hopefully you can join us with sound and picture as we get to the discussion part, which is why we're not recording that part. And I think that's all I have. Oh, maybe I should share my screen one more quick time, because we have some exciting events coming up in the new year. And I'm just going to start with one of them. So that's our January event. And I'm excited about that because we're venturing a little bit into social science, which we don't often do, but we should do more of, because there's certainly very interesting topics. And this one I think is important and very interesting. It's looking at higher education and the advancing of diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially in this case in chemistry education. But whatever will work for chemistry will also work for other sciences. We have a fantastic researcher from UCSD joining us. She is an educational researcher. And she is now the Vice Chair of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for the chemistry and biochemistry at UCSD. So she will share a little bit of her work and the findings she had on how we can make higher education more accessible, more diverse, and why that even is important. I think is a great thing to talk about. And then in January, we will also start another talk series. It's going to be called Live Longer, Live Stronger. That's a 5-part series about the science of aging with the Sanford Burnham Previs Medical Discovery Institute. And that's going to be on the first Wednesday of each month from 2 to 3 p.m. virtually, of course, and it's going to run from January through May. And that will be more of a lecture type. So we'll have a PowerPoint presentation and then some time for Q&A. And we're going to address everything from losing or taking care of your eyesight, taking care of your heart, your bones, looking at risk for cancer. So all of those things will be discussed as the researchers share what they do to learn more about how to age healthier. All right, that as the little fleet plug. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And we're off with that. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. Edward Chao. He is also one of our 2 scientists walk into a bar volunteers. So when we get back to the real life, the non-COVID life, and we can take science back to the bars, you can certainly see him in bars and engage him in a one-on-one conversation as we get that program hopefully back when we can go out again. So without further ado, Edward, take it away.
Thank you, Andrea. And I still have my science, so it's ready to go. It's in the garage. I'm waiting to pack it back in my car and take it back to the next face-to-face event. So I hope to meet you guys, or I wish we could be here in person together. I know this is one of the great events, many great events from the fleet. I have to say, I'm really proud to be part of this. I'm honored to be part of this. I was telling Andrea, growing up, my parents used to take me from LA down to here to San Diego. One of my favorite, probably the favorite place, was coming down to the Fleet Science Center and you know, if not in the exhibit halls, the IMAX theater, and just kind of checking out, asking questions of the volunteers. So some things haven't changed. I still ask questions, and I think the fun part is what I do. I'm a clinical professor of medicine at UCSD, where I get not only to see patients at the VA, but I also get to ask questions. and try to do my small part in answering them through research, in particularly diabetes, and also teach tomorrow's physicians, our residents and our medical students who will be taking care of me someday. So try to treat them well. So thanks for being here today. I wanted to start off with, making sure this is informal. I encourage you to ask questions. I'll have some questions for you as well. But before I begin, just want to throw out a couple questions. So have you guys heard how often people get diagnosed with diabetes in this country? I don't know if you guys want to shout it out. If you guys are on mute, I can just pretend you guys are shouting it out. So basically, unfortunately, every 19 seconds in this country, there's an American adult 20 years or older who's diagnosed with diabetes. So think of it, 1 every 19 seconds. And in the world globally, it's thought to be 1 every 5 seconds somebody is diagnosed with diabetes of any type. And if trends continue, at least in the US, it's thought that by 2050, we'll see as many as 1 in 3 Americans, adults living with diabetes. So for that reason, for the ones who are currently diagnosed, so if you think about just sitting here for an hour, that's about 100, I did the math, about 182, I believe, or 172, I should say. I think it's 172 adults in this country will have been diagnosed in this hour that we were here talking together. So my question, and the team I work with engineers at UCSD, nanoengineers. And what they do is they look at, what the nano term is looking at a billionth of a meter. So I read a great description of, how do you think of a billionth of a meter? It seems so impossibly small to think about. So the example I read was, if you took every single person on Earth, right, I think it's close to 7 billion people, and you shrunk them down to that scale, that 1 billionth of a meter, if you put them all in the size of a Matchbox, it was one of those Hot Wheels cars, everybody would fit in that car. That's how mind-boggling it is, and what a small scale they're working with. So different world than my world, but it's great to be working with them, because one of the great unexpected serendipities, I'll talk more about this in a bit, because science is not a neat orderly march, right? We're depicted in the press and our journal articles as everything proceeds in this matter-of-fact way, and then we went to do this, and then we did that, and we published and we presented, right? And it's taken as, this is all great, but usually the road, like with anything else we do in life, is not so simple, and there's twists and turns. And I can share a little bit about the road we took. But what I want to ask as a question is, what if we took away the needle or the filament that we have in these CGMs and glucometers? Would that help patient engagement? Would that help with patient comfort in testing their sugars for diabetes? And also, would it by extension improve not only their quality of life, but also their clinical outcomes? So both how well their sugars are controlled, and by extension, would they have less risk for complications, say. So we said about this journey, it's been about 4 years in the making. And before I delve into that, I want to jump into kind of a reminder of appreciation of what glucose is and what it does, right? So it's our fuel that makes us, one of my favorite professors in college, who's a neuroscientist, said, everything we do, the poems we write, right, the forms we create at work, everything that we think and create comes down to our brain. So the brain is the biggest consumer of glucose by far. About 60% of our glucose supply is taken up by the brain for vital reasons. And the kicker is that the brain, there's no way to store the glucose. So it has to be basically, supply and demand. So without our awareness or thinking about it, we take for granted that the supply is kept pretty regularly, between 70 to 130 is the level. And that kind of thing works really well. Folks who live with diabetes, unfortunately, don't have that regulation, where they may have, for example, the kidneys may continue reabsorbing glucose instead of letting it out. So paradoxically, you're getting more glucose in your bloodstream when you don't need it. And so our thinking is, how can we change this? Because current ways of testing, right, even the newest flash monitoring system, they're still invasive to some degree. Right now, there's a lot of improvements where it's not necessarily just a needle, but a filament which is thinner, but you're still breaking the skin. So what we looked at, working with the nanoengineers who created this, and let me, if I may, share my screen here, and hopefully this will work. I'm not very technological, but let's see. I'm hoping this will work. Let's see. Oh, here we go. All right. And
yep, that worked.
can you all see? All right. So let me expand here. Oh, let me just do it this way. So this is the sensor. So if we were all in the same room, I would pass this out to you. You can kind of look at it, interact with it in 3D, but this is the closest we can get in this format. So basically what the sensor is, it's very thin, it's lightweight, so it's about 5 by 4 millimeters. It's 2 grams of weight, so very much a thing that you could easily forget you had on. And it's actually a peel and stick, so you can literally peel and adhere to the skin. It conforms to your skin pretty readily. And this sensor itself is measuring glucose in interstitial fluid. So that's the fluid that surrounds and bathes all our cells. And the interesting thing is, we certainly are not the first to have tried measuring without needles, right? And going into something other than blood, which is the gold standard. But there's a lot of challenges. You have to have a very sensitive instrumentation. It has to be about 100 times more sensitive than your glucometer to even get the readings and get some sort of semblance of accurate readings. So how this works, and I'm just going to explain this in the brief nutshell, is that through a process that's called reverse iontophoresis, the sensor actually not only measures, but actually it can pass a very mild electrical current across the skin, and nothing that's unsafe or anything that are barely noticeable. But what happens is when you have that current, the sodium ions are going to migrate over to their negatively charged cathode. And that brings along with them glucose. And then what happens is by measuring the strength of the charge, you're going to be able to get the concentration of glucose. So that in a nutshell is how this works. And what happens then is, we decide to take this from the lab where my colleagues before tested and found it was pretty good results with patients without diabetes. So the next step was with diabetes. And what we did was we compared readings at different time points up to 8 hours. And we brought volunteers in. Once we got consent, right, we had all questions answered. We asked them to fast overnight. So we checked readings at fasting. And then we gave them a high carbohydrate meal and tested every hour after it. So we compared readings from the sensor with your standard glucometer. We found pretty good correlation, really good, strong correlation amongst the two different modalities. And the interesting thing was we were able to present this research at the annual meeting of the American Diabetes Association held in Chicago. It would have been held in Chicago, but it was from our respective homes. And we were able to selected for a poster presentation. And most recently, the fun thing is we got a grant from UCSD, the Accelerating Innovations to Market, where we can take this and further develop. This is a prototype, but certainly a long ways to go in terms of further refining. So how do we get here? So it's pure serendipity. So about 5 years ago, I was attending a meeting of the Academy of Clinician Scholars. So this is a group of physicians who are working and seeing patients at least 50% of the time. So that's me. I said, this is perfect organization for me. And they hand out grants, really modest grants for education and research projects. And I was this new member. I didn't really, it wasn't even on my radar, but I was listening to the updates. So they have the awardees give an update 6 months into their year of funding and then at the end of 12 months. So one in particular caught my eye. I was listening to a psychiatrist named Ipsit Vahia, who is no longer, he went back to the East Coast, but he was talking about working with a nanoengineer named Joseph Wayne. And we got to talking afterwards, and he said, I can introduce you. I think you guys probably will have some common interests as well. So I find myself after puzzling over the map. I had never been in that building and getting lost and finally finding my way over to Joe's office. And we talked and we said, let's collaborate. We have to get funding. So we were fortunate enough to be awarded funding from the same academy about I think half a year later, and then the Altman Clinical and Translational Research Institute. So we run into all kinds of things, right? Once we got the funding, we got somebody to help recruit and work with patients. We got the student who can operate the sensor and the machinery and collect the data. So I remember we started earlier in the duration of the study in 2017. I remember initially seeing, the sensor wasn't working that well, wasn't that accurate. Sometimes the machinery, there's a coin-operated battery that actually, or size of a coin, that operates this, and sometimes it was just quit in the middle of a patient being there that we asked to take time out of their day. And we went through a lot of technical issues. We troubleshooted, and then last year we were ready to go again. So this time, this current version of the sensor, it can actually measure multiple readings without changing. It used to be you had to only one reading and you had to change out every time. So with those refinements, we started back up again. We came to this area, but I'll never forget last year at the end of the year, we got a couple patients going. We saw some promising results. Still some things to work out, but we had more progress than we did back in 2017. I remember the coordinator saying, like, a lot of people are wanting to wait till after the holidays. I said, understandable. We'll certainly accommodate, work with them and way after the new year. So before the pandemic hit, right, we were ready to go. the nanoengineering student actually had an injury and over the holiday break, and we were trying to figure out, was he okay to, we wanted to balance his safety with working with the patients. And then around this time, I got a notice from the ACTRI where we were fortunate to be able to extend the grant because of the circumstances, the issues. And they said, this is it, no more extensions, March 31st, and you're gonna have to, use it or we take back the balance, unfortunately. And so working with that, we were able to get everything worked out with the student between that, and we were able to recruit enough patients who qualified, who did the study. And I remember, just as in the movie when the elevator door is about to close, right? You're trying to escape and you're trying to catch the elevator or catch that train. We happened to get all that done before the pandemic actually shut down the ACTRI for a couple months, I believe. And that's how we're able to actually even be able to present our study in June at the ADA meeting. So a lot of, twists and turns, a lot of unexpected, you would think science has no drama, but there could be certainly room for drama there. So just a brief idea of the winding road it took to get there. But basically there's still a lot of work to do, right? Because, you probably heard the contact lenses, everything from that to measuring saliva to measuring sweat. And there's a lot of, technical issues beyond my expertise, beyond my intellectual power to understand, but there's a lot of good teams working diligently on other solutions that can help with comfort. Because I'll never forget, I mean, in a way, looking back, I think it may have planted the idea in my head. I was working with a patient a few years ago where he was telling me, like he almost had this this kind of downcast look because every time we would talk about your sugars are really high, your A1C is high, and I asked, learned this question from Steve Altman, one of my mentors, who is a great endocrinologist who has great rapport with his patients, and he says, I'll ask patients what's bothering you most about your diabetes, and sometimes that gets you more insight into what kind of things you're facing rather than presume to know what's going on in somebody's life, right, and all that's happening in the world. And so he stopped and looked at me, kind of sighed and said, well, I kind of feel like if I'm testing most of my time, I'm in the 300s and the 400s, and it hurts. And on top of all that, then why kind of bother, right? And sometimes, he would have days where he was testing a few days ago, and then 2 weeks he's not testing at all. So that kind of, in a way, set us on this path where I was able to find these like-minded colleagues who are working on these technological solutions. And that's what it's all about. I think it's kind of asking questions. And I think if I could make an appeal to you out there, it's certainly, there's a lot of room for you as, patients, as interested citizens, as both, to get involved. Because for one, just understanding the world around you, right, is rewarding in itself. Just asking that question, we always, like at kids, we have a couple of girls who are 8 and 5, they ask why, right? And they ask about the world and why things happen. And I find quickly that I don't have a lot of the answers a lot of times after the first 3 whys or less. But the nice thing about it is we apply that curiosity and, engaging with the fleet, engaging with the ACTRI has great events where they talk about being in clinical studies, volunteering to be in a clinical study where you're directly contributing to advancing our knowledge is a great way to get involved. And there are also, the growing trend is to involve patients in designing studies, in designing, I would say probably nearly every aspect of a study. And they actually call it patient centered, I think, or patient kind of involved studies, where I was able to work on a project where they actually award funding based on that. Or sometimes, like this, one of the grants for the ACTRI, they ask a layperson to be a reviewer for the grant, and so they actually say, please include a brief summary of like 150 words explaining this jargon free, and we will run this by our layperson. So a lot of opportunities to get involved because, as you know, the world is changing, right, and there's a lot of different things we will be looking at with the vaccine. So certainly it's great to be able to understand, if only for intellectual curiosity or to help out your fellow people. So I encourage you to get involved in any way you can, and feel free to talk to me as well. I think just engaging with science, engaging with medicine and the breakthroughs, there's always something to learn. And I always say to the students that, the great thing about this career is that you never stop learning. There's never going to be a plateau where you say, I've seen it all and I've read it all and there's nothing will surprise me. It keeps you humble. As we always say, nature really has a way of keeping everybody humble, and medicine is no exception. So that's what I want to kind of give you some ideas with. And before I ask if you know, I encourage you to have any questions, I want to ask, you know, what your thoughts are on this. Do you feel that there's any kind of uh, features that can be not present that can help patients, or I want to throw it out there for you guys for questions. So thank you so much, Andrea and the fleet, and you know, happy to take any questions and engage in discussion.
Wonderful. While everybody takes a moment to gather their questions, I'm going to ask one real quick and then I'm going to end the recording. Did you know, or was it the nanotechnology team that figured out, you know, with the negative charged things in the blood and with the glucose traveling to the sensor, was that something you already knew that that would happen with negative charges, or
Yes.
how did somebody figure that out?
Yes, that's a good question. I believe it was known from perhaps even before, but I know that Joe's team, he had a post, and he's now actually a postdoc, I believe, up in Northwestern, but he was very instrumental in the earlier version of it. So it was a little bit different looking, but basically the same principle. I know that that was used before, I think even before they harnessed it for glucose. I know that there's a principle where the reverse of the normal process is how this works.
Interesting. I find that so interesting that we can use electric current to draw specific particles of
Yeah.
the blood to the surface so we can measure them. I find that fascinating.
Yes, it's interesting. There was actually a product called the Gluco Watch that was on the market for I think 3 years in the early 2000s. So it was approved by the FDA. It was on the market. The only thing was, I think part of the thing was the electrical current was probably a little too strong because people were reporting. Some people were reporting it was too irritating to wear, and to, you know, there were some other technical issues with it. So this iteration here uses less current, but it doesn't sacrifice the accuracy, if you will.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, with that, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you, everybody who's watching us later online. It's good to see you all.